The auctioneer's gavel struck the wooden block with a crack that echoed through Willowbrook Square like the sound of a coffin lid slamming shut. Elena Carmichael stood frozen in the bitter March cold, her jaw clenched as the words rang out. The Carmichael Ranch, 75 acres of grazing land her late husband had poured his soul into, was gone, sold for pennies to the Central Western Railroad Company. "Sold," Judge Marcus Thornfield bellowed from the podium, his voice carrying over the restless crowd. His fat fingers reached for the next deed, his small eyes never leaving Elena. There was satisfaction there, cold and sharp as the wind whipping his gray whiskers. Beside her, 14-year-old Diego pressed close, trembling. His shoulders were narrow beneath his threadbare coat, his chin stubborn like their father's, but his eyes shone with tears he tried hard to hide. The boy had already lost too much. First his father to consumption, now the only home he'd ever known. "That's our land," he whispered hoarsely. "Papa worked that land with his bare hands, built every fence post, cleared every acre." "Hush," Elena murmured, though her throat burned with the same fury. She wrapped an arm around him, keeping her gaze steady on the vultures circling their misfortune. Around them, townsfolk shifted uneasily. Some turned away in shame, unwilling to meet her eyes, remembering perhaps the times Henry Carmichael had helped them through lean winters. Others stared hollow and defeated, too used to losing against men like Thornfield, their own properties hanging by threads just as thin. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Old Tom Wheeler removed his hat, his weathered face grim with understanding. They knew what this meant. Without the ranch, Elena and Diego would have nothing. No income, no home, nowhere to go in a territory that showed little mercy to the destitute. Standing watch around the square's perimeter, the Silver Wolves, Thornfield's hired guns, circled like predators. Their leader, Barnes, was a scarred man with dead eyes who'd earned his reputation from Colorado to Montana. He spat tobacco near Elena's boots, his hand resting on his revolver's grip, sending a clear message to anyone who might consider intervention. Judge Marcus Thornfield descended from his makeshift platform, his fine coat imported from San Francisco, gleaming in the dusty winter light. Gold watch chain glinting across his considerable belly, he carried himself with the easy arrogance of a man who believed he owned everything he set his eyes upon, and usually did. "Mrs. Carmichael," he said, tipping his expensive hat with mock courtesy. "Most unfortunate business, losing one's family home. Such a tragedy when circumstances force these unpleasant necessities." His voice dripped false sympathy. "But perhaps we might discuss alternative arrangements. I'm not without compassion for widows in distress." Elena's spine stiffened like a poker. She knew exactly what he meant. Other widows in the territory had taken his so-called protection, only to find themselves bound in arrangements worse than chains, kept women who traded their dignity for basic survival. Martha Stevens had lasted 3 months before disappearing entirely. Sarah Cole still lived in Thornfield's house, but the life had gone out of her eyes. She lifted her chin defiantly. "I'd sooner share a pit with rattlesnakes than accept anything from you." A flicker of cold anger passed through Thornfield's pale eyes, though his oily smile never faltered. "Pride is a costly luxury, my dear, especially for a woman with a growing boy to feed and the harshest winter in memory. Closing in, the storms this year have already claimed 3 homesteads." He leaned closer, his breath heavy with expensive whiskey and something fouler underneath. "Sheriff Walsh mentioned some concerning reports. Missing courthouse records, tampering with official seals, very serious accusations that could see someone transported to territorial prison. Or worse." Elena's blood turned to ice water in her veins. She had hidden those very documents. Damning proof of Thornfield's falsified land claims, forged signatures, and bribed officials, beneath the loose floorboards of her bedroom in a home that no longer belonged to her. The evidence that could destroy him was now beyond her reach. "I don't know anything about missing papers," she said flatly, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Of course not. Of course not." Thornfield straightened, brushing invisible dust from his silk lapel with manicured fingers. "Still, Sheriff Walsh will naturally want to conduct a thorough search of your former property. Thoroughness in these matters is essential, you understand. Can't have important documents simply vanishing." The trap was snapping shut around her like iron jaws. Elena felt it in the way the silver wolves had shifted position during the conversation, cutting off every possible escape route from the square. Barnes caught her eye and smiled, revealing tobacco-stained teeth, his meaning unmistakable. "Come on, Diego," she whispered urgently, gripping his cold hand. "We need to gather what belongs to us before." But Sheriff Walsh stepped out of the courthouse at that moment, his tin badge catching the pale winter sun. 2 deputies flanked him, young men Elena recognized from better days, when they tipped their hats respectfully to the widow Carmichael. Now they wouldn't meet her gaze. "Mrs. Elena Carmichael," Walsh called out officially, his voice carrying across the square. "I need a word with you, if you please." Official business. Elena's heart began hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She bent low to Diego's ear, speaking quickly and quietly. "Listen to me carefully, son. When I give you the signal, you run fast as you can for the old mining road. Don't stop, don't look back, no matter what you hear behind you. Head straight for Sister Catherine's mission. She'll protect you." The boy's face had gone pale as birch bark, but his jaw set with the same stubborn determination that had defined his father. He nodded once, understanding the gravity of the situation without needing it explained. Walsh approached slowly, his hand resting casually on his gun belt in a gesture meant to intimidate. Behind him, his deputies spread out to block any retreat. "Reports have reached my office suggesting you may have unlawfully removed certain documents from the courthouse. Official territorial records. That's a federal offense, ma'am. You'll need to come with me for questioning, peaceful-like, or this situation will turn uglier than either of us wants." The townspeople began slipping away one by one, unwilling to witness what was about to unfold. Even Mrs. Fletcher, who had faithfully brought soup and comfort when Henry lay dying of consumption, turned her back and hurried into Miller's general store. The few who remained watched with the morbid fascination of spectators at a public hanging. Elena knew she had only one chance. She shoved Diego hard toward the alley between buildings. "Run!" she cried, simultaneously flinging a handful of dirt and gravel into Sheriff Walsh's face. The sheriff cursed violently, clawing at his eyes as grit stung and blinded him temporarily. Elena hitched up her heavy skirts and bolted in the opposite direction from her brother, drawing pursuit away from him. Boots thundered behind her across the frozen ground. A warning shot cracked the cold air, the bullet whining off a nearby stone. She didn't dare turn to look. Instead, she sprinted toward the old mining road that led up into the foothills, her lungs burning in the thin air, her woolen skirts heavy with accumulated ice and snow. The wind cut through her inadequate coat like knives. Snow flurries began stinging her face as the storm that had threatened all morning finally broke in earnest. The sky darkened ominously, and within minutes, visibility dropped to mere yards. Behind her, she could hear hooves pounding. Barnes and at least 2 other riders had mounted quickly to pursue her on horseback. She stumbled down a steep, frozen creek bed, losing her footing on the treacherous ice and crashing hard onto the frozen surface. Sharp pain jolted through her shoulder where she struck a hidden rock, but desperation drove her back to her feet. Blood began seeping through her coat from the impact. The storm intensified rapidly, howling through the canyon like a living thing bent on destruction. It offered concealment, but also promised death by exposure if she couldn't find adequate shelter soon. Her hands, already numb with cold, fumbled desperately through the deepening snow until they found what she was looking for, a carved wooden post, nearly buried but still visible. It was a trapper's marker, one of many Henry had shown her during their courtship, when he'd explained how mountain men navigated the wilderness. This particular post pointed toward a sheltered area where trappers traditionally made camp during severe weather. Following the post's direction, she crawled through the blinding snow toward a dark shadow that gradually resolved into a crude lean-to structure built against a cluster of large boulders. With the last of her strength, she pushed through the hide flap that served as a door and collapsed inside, gasping and half-frozen, and stopped breathing entirely. "Don't move so much as a muscle," a deep voice commanded from the shadows at the back of the shelter. A tall man stepped forward from the darkness, a Henry rifle leveled steadily at her chest. His hair hung long and unkempt past his shoulders. His thick beard was streaked with premature gray, and his eyes were the color of winter storm clouds, and just as cold. Crisscrossing scars marked his throat and the backs of his hands, evidence of violent encounters survived through skill or luck or both. "Not armed," Elena managed to say, her voice shaking from cold and fear. The stranger listened intently to the sounds outside, wind howling, distant shouts growing fainter as her pursuers lost the trail in the worsening storm. After a long moment, he lowered his rifle slightly, though he kept it ready. "How many men tracking you?" he asked tersely. "3 for certain, maybe more. My brother Diego is out there somewhere too. He's only 14 years old. I sent him toward the mission when trouble started. If the boy's got sense, he'll find shelter and wait out the storm." The man studied the wound where blood had begun seeping through her coat sleeve. He stepped closer, his movements controlled and economical. "You're hurt pretty bad." Up close, she could see his scars more clearly. This was a man who had been carved by violence, shaped by hardship, and tempered by survival. Yet when he reached out to examine her injury, his touch was surprisingly gentle. "Name's Marcus Reed," he said at last, his voice gruff but not unkind. "And unless I'm mistaken, you're Elena Carmichael. I've seen you in town on market days. You're the widow from the Carmichael spread, or you were until today's auction." "You watched them take everything," she whispered, the full weight of her losses hitting her anew. "I watch a lot of things in this territory," Marcus replied simply. "Most of it ain't pretty, but it pays to know what's happening and who's making it happen." Outside, voices shouted through the storm, much closer now. Barnes's distinctive growl rose above the wind as he directed his men in their search pattern. They were methodically checking every possible hiding place, and Elena realized with growing dread that they would eventually find this shelter. "They'll discover me here," she said, trying to keep panic from her voice. "When they do, they'll kill both of us." Marcus Reed's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his gray eyes, a hardening that spoke of decisions made and accepted. "Well now," he said calmly, "they're welcome to try." He pressed a clean cloth, surprisingly fine embroidered linen that seemed out of place in this rough shelter, into her trembling hand. "Hold this tight against that shoulder wound. Stay down low and keep quiet no matter what you hear." Without another word, he slipped through the hide flap and disappeared into the swirling white hell outside, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Elena pressed the cloth to her injury and crouched in the darkness, her heart hammering so loud she was certain it could be heard above the storm. She could hear her own ragged breathing, the relentless shriek of wind through the canyon, and somewhere in the white chaos beyond the shelter, the muffled voices of armed men searching for her with deadly intent. For the first time since the auctioneer's gavel had fallen in Willowbrook Square, she felt something she had almost forgotten, a fragile spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, she might survive this nightmare. The blizzard howled through the mountain passes like something alive and malevolent, hurling snow horizontally and swallowing every sound except its own fury. Elena huddled inside the makeshift shelter, her shoulder throbbing beneath the blood-stained cloth Marcus had given her. She had never been so acutely aware of her own mortality, every heartbeat thundering in her ears as she strained to hear what was happening in the white chaos outside. Minutes crawled by like hours. The cold seeped through the crude walls of the lean-to, and she found herself shivering uncontrollably, despite her efforts to stay still and quiet. Her breath came in visible puffs that she tried to muffle against her sleeve, terrified that even this small sign of life might betray her presence to the hunting men. Then, after what felt like an eternity of waiting, the hide flap stirred, and Marcus slipped back inside. Snow clung to his coat and hair, and she noticed his rifle stock was now decorated with a thin coating of ice. His gray eyes scanned her quickly, checking for signs of deterioration, before moving to survey the small fire pit in the center of the space. "They've moved on," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the storm's roar. "Barnes ain't stupid enough to fight this mountain in weather like this. They'll circle back to town, wait it out, then come looking again when they can see what they're shooting at." Elena sagged with relief, though her body continued to shake from cold and delayed shock. "How can you be sure they won't come back tonight?" "Because I know Barnes, and Barnes knows these mountains. He's killed plenty of men, but he's also smart enough not to die for Thornfield's money when he can wait for better odds." Marcus knelt beside the fire pit and began the careful process of striking flint against steel. "Storm's getting worse, not better. Could last through tomorrow, maybe longer." Soon a small flame caught and began to grow, casting dancing shadows against the rough stone walls. The warmth spread slowly through the confined space, and Elena felt some of the deadly chill begin to leave her bones. The shelter, she realized, was more sophisticated than she'd first thought. Carefully positioned to avoid wind, with stones arranged to reflect heat, and supplies stored in waterproof containers. In the flickering firelight, Elena studied her unexpected savior more carefully. His scars told stories she couldn't read, but somehow understood. This was a man who had seen violence up close and personal, who had survived encounters that killed other men. Yet his hands, as steady and sure as they fed wood to the growing fire, showed no cruelty. They were the hands of someone who built things, fixed things, protected things. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, genuine curiosity overcoming her natural caution. "You don't know me, don't owe me anything. For all you know, I really did steal those documents they're talking about." Marcus didn't look up from the fire immediately. When he did speak, his voice carried a weight of old pain. "Because you're not the first widow Thornfield's tried to break down and steal from. I've watched him destroy good families for years. Take what ain't his, ruin lives for profit." He glanced at her then, and she saw something deeper and darker in his eyes, a memory that had left permanent marks on his soul. "And because I've got my own damn good reasons for wanting to see that bastard fall." Elena pressed her lips together, sensing there was a story there that went far deeper than what he was willing to share with a stranger. His expression warned her not to press tonight, when they were still in danger, and emotions ran too close to the surface. Instead, she said carefully, "My brother Diego. I told him to run for Sister Catherine's mission when trouble started. She's taken in other children who needed help. He's a smart boy, knows those trails better than most adults." Marcus nodded approvingly. "Smart thinking on both your parts. The mission's well built, and Sister Catherine don't take kindly to men with guns showing up uninvited. If the boy made it there, he'll be safe until this storm passes and we can figure out our next move." A comfortable silence settled between them. broken only by the snap and crackle of the fire and the endless shriek of wind outside their small sanctuary. Elena tried not to think about Thornfield's men waiting in town for the weather to clear. Tried not to imagine Diego alone and frightened in the storm. Tried not to dwell on the fact that she had lost everything she'd worked to build since Henry's death. Instead, she forced herself to focus on immediate concerns, staying warm, staying alive, and figuring out how to retrieve those hidden documents that could expose Thornfield's criminal empire. Marcus rummaged through his surprisingly well-stocked pack and produced a small metal flask. Without any warning, he uncorked it and poured a generous amount of whiskey directly onto her shoulder wound. Elena bit down hard on her glove to muffle the scream that tore from her throat. Stars exploded behind her tightly closed eyes as liquid fire burned through damaged tissue. "Sorry for the surprise," Marcus said matter-of-factly, "but that wound needs cleaning before infection sets in. Seen too many good people die from dirty cuts that seemed harmless at first." He pulled needle and thread from his kit with the efficiency of someone who'd done field surgery before. The needle gleamed wickedly in the firelight. "This is going to hurt considerably worse than the whiskey, but it needs doing. That shoulder's torn deeper than it looks." Elena forced herself to meet his eyes steadily. "Do what needs doing. I can handle it." His hands proved to be remarkably steady and practiced as he worked. Each stitch sent fire racing through her shoulder, but she managed to stay motionless, biting down on the leather glove to keep from crying out. He worked in concentrated silence, his scarred face focused intently on the delicate task of closing the jagged wound. When he finally tied off the last stitch and cut the thread, his voice softened slightly with something approaching respect. "You held still through all of that. Most men I've patched up made more noise and caused more trouble. You've got sand, Mrs. Carmichael." "I was a nurse during the war," Elena admitted, flexing her shoulder carefully to test the repair. "Worked in field hospitals from Bull Run to Antietam. I've seen what happens when people panic during medical procedures." Marcus studied her hands more carefully. The calluses that spoke of hard work, the faint chemical stains from medicines and harsh soaps, the small scars from needles and scalpels. Then he gave a single nod of understanding. "That explains the steady nerves. War nurses see things that break most folks completely." For the first time since their paths had crossed, a flicker of mutual respect passed between them. Elena leaned back against the stone wall, exhausted but somehow feeling stronger than she had in hours. She wrapped herself in the wool blanket Marcus offered, noting that it smelled of campfire smoke, leather, and something else. Pine needles and mountain air, the scent of a man who lived close to the wild places. Outside their shelter, the storm continued its relentless assault on the mountain, but inside the lean-to, something fundamental had shifted. She was no longer completely alone in her fight against impossible odds. She had found an ally, perhaps even a friend, in the most unlikely of circumstances. By morning, the blizzard had finally exhausted itself, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Drifts reached the eaves of buildings in town, and the mountain passes lay buried under blankets of white that would take days to melt. Marcus stamped out their fire with practiced efficiency, packed his gear with military precision, and handed Elena a tin cup filled with bitter but warming coffee. "Today we start fighting back," he said, his gray eyes hard as winter granite. "First we find your brother and make sure he's safe. Then we figure out how to get those documents you hid, and after that..." His voice trailed off, but his expression finished the thought with deadly clarity. "How do we fight a man who owns the sheriff, controls the judge, and has an army of killers at his beck and call?" Elena asked, though she could already see determination replacing despair in her own heart. Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade, and twice as dangerous. With the truth, with fire, with whatever it takes to bring him down. I've been waiting years for the right moment and the right partner in this fight. Looks like fate just delivered both. Elena touched the hidden pocket inside her coat where her most precious possessions now rested. Not jewelry or money, but papers that could destroy Thornfield's empire if they reached the right authorities. She thought of his sneering face at the auction, the way the townspeople had turned their backs on her family's destruction, and Diego's frightened eyes as he ran for his life. Her jaw set with new resolve. Then we make sure that son of a bitch doesn't win. Whatever it costs, whatever it takes. Marcus gave a single decisive nod. Good. Then let's ride, partner. They stepped out into the brilliant morning light together. Two souls who had been hunted and broken, but refused to stay down. The mountain air was sharp enough to cut glass. The snow so bright it hurt to look at directly. But their path forward had never been clearer. Somewhere in the valley below, Judge Marcus Thornfield was waiting, secure in his stolen power and ill-gotten wealth. He had no idea that his worst nightmare was about to descend from the mountains, armed with proof of his crimes and the desperate courage of people who had nothing left to lose.